they're open consciousness. Yeah, this is the modern world, right? So it's the first time we ever have a face-to-face conversation. It's on video. So what is the world we live in? Stand up. Which would you prefer? You're the right there. But don't stand in front of it. So we're using the light from the window. And how is Terence's role in this as on-camera star through interviewing people and he's the bridge at the
So, this was a great frontier for you personally to cross over into a paranormal theory about this stuff.
Yeah, I was raised in the strict materialist point of view, that the only things that were real were things that you could touch, knock, eat, look at, and here people were telling me experiences that could not be photographed, corroborated, yet from their point of view this was as real as me standing in front of them. And all the people I talked with were describing the exact same experiences without benefit of any kind of details in the media that could account for that.
To cue that. Well, do you think that this is something that's been going on for millennia, or that this is suddenly an event with a historical element to it, and that it is recent and therefore building towards some sort of resolution?
There are folklorists who say that we have been visited by little people for centuries, if not for millennia. But this form of visitation has a hard edge to it that is different than what we've seen before. It started with the Betty and Barney Hill case, and since then there have been hundreds and moving now into the thousands of reported cases which have a kind of structure to it which is unlike what we've had before. There are similarities to previous visitations, but the modern abduction phenomenon has a distinction which has to be studied in its own right.
And do you have an interpretation of what that distinction implies? Is it apocalyptic? Is it technological? What is it?
Well, I first had to satisfy myself about what the phenomenon was, that it was not psychosis, it was not some strange dissociative condition, not some neurosis, not some contagion from the media. In fact, it has no resemblance to any psychiatric condition that in my 40 years of work in this field I had recognized. It's not some displaced abuse, all those things which naturally my colleagues and I think of in relation to this. This has its own structure, its own quality. Otherwise sane people having these highly traumatic, very dense, highly articulated, detailed, congruous experiences, which can begin to be reported in children as young as 2 years old, associated with UFOs in otherwise sane people. So I had to start by satisfying myself that this was not something else. Okay, then I can begin not from my own speculations, but from the information that the abductees themselves get from the experience. I'm beginning to put together a structure of what this is about. And what I'm getting is that if you could think of the divine, or if you can think of the world of both spirit with form and spirit without form, or the anima mundi, whatever your language for it, the Great Spirit, the Holy Spirit, whatever it is, we have lost contact with it. It signals us we don't listen. There are various ways that certain people have revelations and experiences. Occasionally, the more advanced spiritual people among us are reconnecting with the spirit. But for most of us, the only language that we know now is the language of the material world. So it's as if the divinities say, okay, if that's all you understand, I'll give it to you in the material world. I'll give you physical manipulations, I'll give you reproductive connection, I'll give you cuts, scars, scoop marks, I'll give you burned earth where the UFOs land, and I'll give you an experience which is consistent among various people, which empirically everybody agrees, they're photographs of UFOs. It's showing up in the physical world. It may not be of the physical world as we know it, but it communicates in the physical world, and when something shows up in the physical world that belongs in the spirit world, that gets the stiff-necked materialists very excited. Now they want physical proof, just like in empirical science, because all other faculties of knowledge have been atrophied. But this gets their attention because it shows up in the language we understand, which is the physical language.
You link it to the anima mundi, then do you think of it as an ecological danger signal, that it's a message from an Earth intelligence, perhaps the Earth intelligence?
There are two pieces of evidence that suggest that that's true. One is that the abductees themselves on the ships receive intense messages about ecological destruction, annihilation of whole forest systems, pollution of the water system, visions of the planet dying, and they see that on television-like screens. They get it through telepathic communication, and these are not environmentalists, these people. They are people who are very simple, ordinary people, unremarkable, except that they are getting this extraordinary information. And they actually become intensely, passionately concerned about the Earth and what's happening to the Earth, and their children do, because their children may be abducted as well. So that's one piece of information. The other piece of information is they experience themselves as not in control, being taken against their wills, being treated the way we treat animals, tagged with implants, having physical, emotional experiences in which they're utterly terrified and without being able to control what's going on. And that, for them, brings home how we treat other creatures on the planet, our kind of, as was discussed at this conference in Prague by Ralph Metzner, this kind of humanistic arrogance, as if the only creatures that were really important on the planet were ourselves, and we were superior in some way to all of the life forms. This phenomenon shows us that we are being treated the way we treat animals, as if they existed only for our pleasure, and they totally transform how they treat animals, how they treat the earth, how they relate to the environment around them. So through this experience in the body, because that's the important point here, this experience is not just information in an intellectual sense. They experience these abductions in the body, and as several abductees have said to me, we only know the body now as embodied creatures. If you want to reach us, you have to reach us through the body, because that's the only language we understand. So that tells us that the creatures are real in some sense.
Well, in what sense? I suppose the future can only tell, but maybe it's part of the unraveling of the end of the millennium, some kind of union of spirit and matter. Well, John, I want to thank you for taking time off from your busy schedule of entertaining to come and talk to us.
Can I make one more point? Which you
Make it, dude.
Okay. If you want to shatter the Western mental structures, the Western mind, so to speak, which is now permeating the whole earth in its materialist, dualistic philosophy, the way you do it is you take something that's supposed to be in the spirit world, because even in the West we can make allowance for the spirit world, and we can study it through mythology, through religion, through imagination, through poetry. But the one unforgivable sin to the Western mind is when something that should be in the spirit world transgresses and shows up in the physical world. That traffic is the cardinal sin for the Western mind. So it has great power to shatter the belief structure of the Western mind when that occurs. And that's precisely what's occurring in this abduction phenomenon.
Very good point. Thanks very much for talking with me. Good. We're talking with Dr. Igor Charkovsky, who is the father of the water birth method and a physician from Moscow. Dr. Charkovsky, can you tell us something about the water birth method?
Расскажите нам что-нибудь о методе рождения в воде.
Я думаю, что о нем мало кто знает.
It is practically nobody who now has got a lot of information about it, although it is gradually becoming more and more popular. A normal baby who's experienced water birth can swim, let us say, the ocean very easily.
Это практически водное существо, которое адаптировано к воде лучше, чем к условиям суши.
And a baby, it is practically a sea creature who is better adapted to live in the water than on Earth.
Это существо, которое не просто способно обитать, оно способно обитать в среде, которая дает ему огромные оккультные, психические, не говоря уже о физических возможностях.
And such a baby is not only adapted to the sea and to the water, but it is also adapted to the giant occult properties revealed by water and the world ocean.
И вслед за Библией, которая утверждает,
The Bible says us that the earth stands on the whales, and I can say that such sea creatures as whales, they reveal us a lot of hidden knowledge on our evolution. The first water births have been taking place together with the dolphins, and my initial idea was that dolphins were very necessary for this kind of birth. World religions like Christianity, they are also founded on similar information. So normally I think children should be submerged into the water and then to swim with the dolphins, so that practically every of them could swim hundreds of miles.
So this is not simply a matter of creating a less traumatic birth for infant and mother. This is more a mysticism of water itself, a kind of religion of the aqueous dimension. Is that right?
Let us begin with that the humanity, the human species in general nowadays is mentally disturbed as a whole.
Те роды, которые сейчас существуют, они практически кастрируют человека, и его духовные и физические возможности тоже.
The birth methodologies that we've got nowadays, they are very likely to castrate mentally the persons who are being born. And if we take normal children after water birth being born underwater, the society did a lot and is constantly doing a lot in order to destroy the unique abilities that have been revealed by way of this water birth. A child having experienced water birth practices a sort of pranayama, one can say. It can hold its breath for several minutes. And I would like to point out that the Russian clairvoyant and researcher Tsiolkovsky wrote in the beginning of the century that children after water birth could develop their clairvoyant abilities and develop the potentialities of their brain.
Кролики, которые рождают под водой, не живут в 3 раза, и мозг их значительно более совершенный.
Animals giving birth under the water, they live about 3 times longer than the so-called normals, and their brain is usually bigger. I mean primarily rabbits, кролики,
Кролики.
rabbits.
So do you believe that this is the original method of human birth and that somehow we lost this practice through history and now must regain it? Is that your notion?
Undoubtedly, and the human species, like any other species existing now on the ground, on the earth, they've got a history that includes also their water existence. Our civilization constantly destroys the great abilities having been given to the children by nature. For instance, I can say that children of 4, 5, 6 months they can make mountain climbing, they can jump easily, for instance, from this particular table, and they can reveal various other incredible things.
So obviously your method of birth is not widely used. Are you an optimistic person in terms of the human situation, or are you feeling pessimistic as we approach the next millennium?
20 years ago that Boris Ivanov predicted that by the second millennium it will be about 60% of American babies who will be delivered by means of water birth.
Он оказался оптимистом. Я думаю, что американцы не успеют к этому времени так
He
перестроиться.
proved to be optimist. I'm not sure that the Americans could proceed so speedily, so rapidly.
Если бы у них были такие условия, как тот геноцид, который мы создали на нашей территории, так сказать, в бывшем СССР, то, возможно, они бы быстрее перестроились, потому что
Probably the Americans could have been more rapid if they could have had something like the Holocaust that we have experienced in the Soviet system after these years. Now, there have been a lot of cases when mothers waiting babies, they were really irradiated 30 years before Chernobyl, for instance, in the Republic of Kazakhstan. So for many of them, this attempt of giving water birth was like an attempt to give a better future for their babies who were very probable to be already sick. And for instance, I have myself experienced a lot of premature births because of these disturbances caused by negative influence of radiation and of similar factors. And it was my idea to take these children, these babies, into the liquid surrounding, and in this way to try to save them.
лучше
Then
владеть
nearer to the
самой.
topic of our conference, the theme of anabiosis. For instance, I firmly believe that there are such cases when babies have been hexed. And my impression is that one shouldn't supply energy for them in this state, but quite directly opposite. One should slow down the processes, their energetic balance, to take them out of this negative state in a slow way. Now, the rate of survival of children being held underwater is much higher than the rate of survival of babies in so-called normal conditions. It has been shown by a number of physiological studies. And for instance, if the babies have already got some disturbances, primarily heart disturbances, I would say that water births or just spending a lot of time in the water is equal for them with, for instance, the massage of the heart, the direct massage. It is really producing incredible results, and I think that by means of contraction of veins and of arteries and of the corresponding changes in the blood, one can produce sort of another heart, of another physiological organ inside the body, created by means of new.
Но это при одном условии, чтобы люди, которые находятся, были психически здоровы. Потому что если при курах
Now the main problem is that the mother and the people attending to this, they should be normal and they should be very positive to this kind of treatment and of lifestyle, because very frequently, for instance, if the hen is desperately worried about her child, the chicken can die because of this particular anguish.
Отсюда появляются дельфины, потому что дельфин обладает могучим сильным полем, и когда он плод берет в свое, так сказать, покровительство или касатка, то она снимает вот то, что называется эволюционным неврозом, который парализует не только наше мышление, фантазию.
I would call such kind of things evolutionary neurosis, which paralyzes a lot of positive abilities of the baby, and this is why I tend to recur to the help of dolphins, who've got a wonderful energetic field.
It must have been very difficult for you as a kind of visionary and mystic to spread these sorts of ideas inside a social system that was so largely materialistic. Has it been easier for you since the changes in the Soviet Union?
I have to tell you that there is a great lot of mystics and mystically minded people in Russia, and they have been constantly working all the time. Probably they were unable to produce as many books or various other materials as in the West, but this hidden culture has been very, very, very active in my country. I will tell you quite frankly about my problems. For instance, I come to the West and I submerge the baby under the water, and then I freeze it for 24 hours, and then I put a thermometer into his rectal, how do you call it, rectum, yes. And I take his temperature, and it is 5 degrees lower than normal. And then you understand very well that the doctors attending to the baby are very much against it.
Значит, в год я привез во Францию парня, который может проплыть 100 километров. Я показал, они побоялись это зарегистрировать.
For instance, I have brought a one-year-old baby to France, who could at that time swim about 60 miles. And they were, my impression is that they were simply afraid of the baby, and it is not registered anywhere. It's just...
Японцы о родах в воде знают 30 лет. И там ни один, по-моему, еще никто не родил, я не слышал.
For instance, the Japanese have got quite enough information during the last 30 years, but I don't know about a single case of water birth in Japan during this time.
Шведы 15 лет издали книжку, ни одна шведка не родила в воде, родила из Ленинграда 2 ребенка, иммигрантка, наша, так сказать. Хотя у них эти книги продаются везде, так сказать. Вот вам оккультная подготовка.
There is a special book written in Swedish and that you can buy everywhere, and there is a lot of information about water birth by the Swedes, and I know about only one case, and that was by a woman who emigrated to Sweden from Russia. So this is the occult life of the West, which is very well developed, but still there are problems.
Теперь с Америкой такая же история.
Now let's come to the United States.
Американцы пишут о том, что вот они учат плавать. Ни один ребенок, младенец, не научен плавать, хотя система, так сказать, была опубликована, неоднократно заявлено, что младенцы могут проплывать километры. Не то, что барахтаться под водой.
There is quite enough information being published and produced by mass media in the United States that children can swim several miles in a row, and there is a methodology of teaching them to swim.
Ни одного младенца нет. Они даже не хотят его обучать никого. Ни на одного, на всю Америку.
I don't know a single case in all the United States, a single baby who would have been taught this methodology.
What kind of a world would we have if everyone had been born according to your methods?
I wouldn't call it my methodology, it is primarily an evolutionary methodology. One could say that a baby has already got hidden knowledge about the trauma that is waiting for him because of the gravitation. during the birth, and so it doesn't develop the brain and its capacities.
Поэтому, так сказать, эти программы закладываются,
could be
чтобы
regarded as imminent.
рожали все время ограниченных людей с ограниченным мозгом.
So the program is that the babies should be born with smaller brain, smaller heads. I would say that human species are not simply handicapped. We are, in some sense of the word, corpses, because we don't use the better and the bigger part of our earth, which is water.
Would sense of gravity seems to be the problem here. Would birth in the weightlessness of space be the equivalent to water birth?
No, it wouldn't be equivalent. Producing our space programs, we have made a giant holocaust of our culture, the best of our science, and the general of our way of life.
В воде человеку не нужно ни одежды,
It is not space programs,
не нужно
because
этих библиотек.
in the water you don't need clothes, you don't need all these libraries.
Ребенок очень быстро входит в состояние и видит все прошлое. Значит, история, которой мы врем, так сказать, на каждом шагу, так сказать, ему нет необходимости.
And looks into the past of its species.
Ему нет необходимости в этой дорогостоящей, экологически ущербной, так сказать, цивилизации, которая уничтожает планету, так сказать, загрязняет ее.
Doesn't need at all this huge civilization, which is all the time producing ecological catastrophes.
И делает человека рабом, так сказать, тех услуг, которые обходятся в это самоубийство, так сказать.
Such a baby doesn't need to be a slave of all these modern industrial capacities and of all these high technologies.
So is this the answer that the world is waiting for? Is this the secret that would bring us back?
Та вещь, которую мир ожидает, это и есть тот секрет, который приведет нас назад?
Ну, не просто везет, мы уже, по-моему, в этой пропасти уже летим. Вопрос, как мы там зацепимся за что-нибудь
My
или
impression
нет.
is that the catastrophe is not imminent, is that we are already falling into the abyss. Probably we could grasp, we could hold something on our way down, but it's not sure. I think we should try to give birth to ecologically pure creatures. And so we should give birth a new surrounding, so that we shouldn't give birth to children, to babies getting into the same wrong system.
So a new birth would mean a new world of a sort.
Being born into the new world, being born into nature, being born into creative display of abilities of the dolphins, and then feeling during all life being linked to this natural world.
The complete seamless web of life is what you come to appreciate if you have this kind of birth method in your path.
Yes, and I would say in the other way that being born into the gravitation world is already a trauma and a disaster. One has to reverse it. Birth should bring you primarily to living through your earlier incarnations. So primarily to change one excellent condition, that is the condition inside the loving mother, into another good ambience, that is water. And secondly, to have creative intercourse with such creatures as dolphins.
So these are the two keys.
Два ключа, вы бы сказали, такие вот основные.
Да там может и больше, я не знаю.
Probably much more.
Much more. Well, thank you very much for talking with us today. It's a
Большое
pleasure.
спасибо за то, что вы нам говорили.
Надо работать и не разговаривать, по-моему.
We should all of us work and not speak.
Организовывать.
Well said, Igor.
Хорошо сказано.
Cut. Thanks very much. Very interesting stuff.
That was great. Really wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Do we have an answer to Dan Quayle? Step up.
get those shoes.
Yeah, let's do a pan up.
They're
Kathy keeps harassing me about this.
no, they're wonderful.
They're great.
I think they're
I
great.
bought them right here.
They're absolutely
Local shoes.
all
And they're very,
correct.
they're very comfortable.
Ready? Are we rolling? Okay, let's do it.
So I'm not supposed to look into the camera. Is that the deal?
No, I think you can look into the camera. Basically ignore them, but look at them every once in a while. Well, so you've been hitting this conference pretty hard. Have you come across any stunning insights?
Well, actually, I came here beginning of last week, because I was doing a workshop in Munich, and then I took the night train here, and I to spend about 3 or 4 days here before the conference, because I wanted to see the conference. So my main experience is actually the experience of Prague. I mean, the conference, if it wasn't in Prague, I probably wouldn't go to it, because the speakers I've all heard before, but I have not heard the Eastern Europeans. So I'm mostly interested in networking with the Eastern Europeans and really getting a sense of Prague, which is, to me, like a very impressive city. And then this whole political thing is happening where the country is dissolving its two parts in a relatively peaceful way. I think it's an incredibly dramatic thing that's happening. I mean, they're demonstrating how to do it. You know, unlike the Yugoslavs, their neighbors were demonstrating how not to do it. And some of the figures that Stan, I don't know if you heard his talk on the opening night when he was saying that Czechoslovakia has only lived without foreign rule for 25 years out of the last 300. I mean, that's an incredible statistic.
That's incredible.
And to think that somehow they have managed, I mean, they've demonstrated in this whole century, you know, in such incredible political sensitivity and flair, really.
For
and
survival.
Humor. Yeah, humor
Yes.
and flair for survival. And I've been reading Václav Havel's talks, whom I feel very close to, and I was thinking about, and I visited this memorial for that student John Palak, you know, who incinerated himself in 1968, or 69, after the Russians clamped back down.
Right.
And basically the whole Prague Spring was killed, squelched, and you know, the lid came back on after this 2 or 3 year period of gradual thawing and gradual opening up and people breathing free for the first time for 20 years. And then whammo, and then this to me struck me as a gesture of like it was really like devotional self-sacrifice to an ideal. It was like what the ancient Celtic and Germanic people used to do. In terms of, and in a similar circumstances, like when they felt that they were like being invaded or conquered or beaten up or oppressed, and they felt that somehow their gods were against them, and so they would do a voluntary self-sacrifice, you know, and this guy did that, you know? And Havel keeps talking about that. He keeps talking about, I don't have a right to ask anybody else to lay down their life or do any kind of a commitment. But that to me is a very live issue. Like, what commitment am I willing to make? You know, am I willing to lay down my life? Am I willing to go to jail for what I believe in? I can't ever ask it for somebody else. So here's a person who's really thinking the kinds of ethical questions that people never think about. Never. You know, and I was impressed by the fact that back in 1985 he was already talking about anthropocentrism, and which is the whole key to what I'm talking about these days, this kind of humanist superiority complex. The main point I was trying to make in my talk today was that there's this the humanist tradition, which is the glory of Western European civilization, is really the shadow side of that, which was not intended and not realized at the beginning when Renaissance humanism started, because these people like Marsilio Ficini and those people, I mean, they were trying to free themselves from 1,000 years of medieval Catholicism, and you know, men are just nothing but sinners and miserable worms on the earth, and they said, no, human beings are worthwhile and noble, and you know,
Man is the measure
man
of
is the measure of all
things.
things. But then
implicit in that was the view that man is superior to animals.
Right.
And that then gradually kind of fed into the whole idea of man is superior to animals. That means we can do with animals whatever we want to, and it kind of just reinforced that whole belief system.
So it was a provisional idea that should have been replaced by a kind of ecological ethic in the 19th century that
they shouldn't have taken. They took
come to be.
Yeah, they took it too far, I think. See, the basic idea, yes, man is worthwhile, is true, but they didn't. Man's worth shouldn't be dependent on the lower worth of somebody else, like the other species.
The hierarchy of worth.
Right. But doing it that way meant that humanism then becomes exactly analogous to sexism and racism and classism, in each of which you have one group of people who say, we're better than others, this other group, and therefore we have the right to use and exploit and dominate and control and push these others around every way we please. And that's not necessary. You don't have to do that. You can say, yes, human beings are worthwhile, women are worthwhile, men are worthwhile too, and the working classes are great, and so are the...
So no hierarchy of worth.
No hierarchy of worth.
Generalized affirmation.
Which doesn't mean you can't have division of labor and division of function and specialization of functions and all that. But don't attribute that, and also specialized role. Yes, human beings have a special role on the planet, but then so do whales, and so do trees, and so do coral reefs, and invertebrate marine animals.
Well, so would you say that probably what we're trying to do is define our special role, and that it's not industrial manufacture of everything, but more like gardener caretaker?
Gardener caretaking, and I think true science. I think this. See, I go back to the biblical thing, because in the Bible there are actually two sets of instructions from God to man. One of them is, you shall subdue the earth and have dominion and do all that whole thing. And that was been interpreted as domination. And but there's another set of instructions in the Yahwist Bible. See, that's the priestly version. The older version, the Yahwist version, which is not the 6 days of creation. It's God created man directly out of the clay, breathed life into him, and then created the animals and made the garden. And then he brought all the animals to Adam and said, you name them. Whatever you name them, that's what they'll be. So the naming function. See, I think human beings are the nerve cells of the planet. And the nerve cells function to interpret, analyze, categorize, name. That's the one thing humans do that animals don't do. They don't give names. They have consciousness. It's totally different. They don't use symbolic categories, as far as we know. I mean, they can, but as far as we know, they don't.
The nervous system is the rapid response system.
Right.
And certainly that's where
that would be like green. That would be, to me, green science. So observational science, non-interventional science, science not bent to technology and exploitation, except insofar as is necessary to maintain life. Animals eat other animals, and so you have the right to do that, but you don't have the right to
cut down
abuse and to take more than you need.
Right.
You don't have the right to, and you don't generate waste. Like the primal cultures, they didn't generate. They used all they took, and they didn't generate waste, and they didn't take more than they needed. And they didn't make profit. They didn't do it for profit. They just did it to live. And with that kind of a system and that kind of an attitude, you have a sustainable economy.
Well, so this is one more reason for thinking about semi-archaic solutions to modern social problems.
That's right.
Abandoning science seems to be abandoning consumerism, capitalism.
I don't think it means abandoning science. I don't even think it means abandoning technology. I think it means redirecting technology.
No, I agree. It's consumerism that has to be.
That's right. Consumerism is like a collective addiction. More and more goods from more and more people. That's basically the slogan.
At greater and greater cost, and cost to the sum total of everybody.
Profit-driven. It's not really need-driven.
I hear you.
I think Riane Eisler, I think that was the key thing in her book, was that the level of culture does not equate to the level of technology. The technology can be sophisticated as all get out, and the culture is primitive, and that's what we have. Versus, you take the Australian Aboriginals or the Minoan Cretans, their level of culture and technology much lower than ours, but the level of culture was
Much higher.
far superior. I mean,
Right. No, well,
incomparably, including things like education, levels of, no poverty, no unemployment, no crime, all these kind of things. So, the technology needs to be redirected away from the military towards restoration and preservation and restoration of the environment. There's more than enough challenges there to keep all the Star Wars guys and
everybody
busy
else
for the next
employed
millennium,
forever.
for crying out loud.
Yeah, I agree. Well,
So
Ralph,
I'm having a good time.
good. I'm glad you're having a good time. That's a good rave. You'll see yourself in lights at a theater near you
Yes,
someday soon.
Yes. No
So
doubt.
thanks for dropping by the Animal House.
Sure. Good luck in your
Here-
project. Yeah.
Tech. Techno.
Take this thing out of my belly button here.
Behind me is the landscape of modern Prague, and it seems to me Prague is a city which participated in one of the most important bifurcations in the history of Western thought. A little background may be necessary. The Emperor Rudolph II was chosen by the electors of the Northern League, and at his death they chose from among themselves a new emperor, in this case Frederick, Prince Palatine of Heidelberg, who had recently married Elizabeth, the daughter of James of England. Frederick the Elector assumed that the King of England giving his daughter's hand in marriage signaled approval for Frederick's visionary plan for an alchemical kingdom in Central Europe to be ruled by himself from Prague. And to this end, Frederick transferred his court from Heidelberg to Prague in the fall of 1619. This is a historical episode that has become known as the incident of the Winter King and Queen. Frederick the Elector Palatine of Bohemia and his queen, Elizabeth, ruled for nearly a year from Prague and brought with them the alchemists of Heidelberg. Personalities such as Michael Meyer, Johannes Andrei, and Heinrich Kunrath graced their court. But the alchemical fantasies of Frederick the Elector Palatine of Bohemia and his queen were destined to fail, for by the early spring of 1620, a local bishop had raised an army and had been joined by Habsburg troops who laid siege to Prague. And that siege, after a number of weeks, succeeded. Among those taking part in the siege was a young French soldier who had been wenching and traveling across Europe in the style of the times, René Descartes, destined to be the founder of modern scientific materialism. I like to think that perhaps Descartes actually encountered his bête noire, Michael Meyer, Prince of Alchemists, in the confused situation that prevailed when Prague fell. For Meyer was lost in the siege of Prague, never to be heard from again. It's instances like this in the history of European thought that have inspired a group of American thinkers to form the Bohemian Institute of Prague, a think tank, theater group, and video production center to be established here in Prague and to celebrate the occult and spiritual heritage of this great city, a city which had its alchemical visions been completed, modernity would have been a far different affair.
Terence.
Mickey.
Well, Terence, what if there had been a different story? What if, in the duel between Michael Meyer and René Descartes that you've envisaged, it's not Meyer who dies, but Meyer who blows a near-fatal hit to Descartes. And Descartes experiences a near-death experience, in which he sees not only in a panoramic view, as we all know what happens at a near-death experience, his own life, but he experiences his own future and the future of the world that would have happened if his principles, his ideas, his influence on the scientific, mechanical world would have been as big as we imagine it has been on the point where we're sitting now.
Are you saying we're trapped inside René Descartes' near-death experience, Mickey?
You're dead right, in the near-death experience. All these characters, myself and you included, we are just actors inside Descartes' brain. And as we all know, near-death experiences show in near-death experiences a lot of tryptamine shows up in the brain. So I believe we are just part of a tryptamine near-death trip of René Descartes in the year 1620. Now, there is, of course, an itch to it.
Yes.
How do you
Lead on,
feel?
maestro.
Right. Okay, now, at a certain point, maybe through the ingestion of tryptamine compounds in our brains, we become aware of the fact that this is not reality, but this is the interior design of Descartes' near-death experience. So we may become aware of this. Well, if he's just imagining this as things could have been, but as they also may not happen, well, what if we come to life with René Descartes? I mean, we are bleeding all over the place. Michael Meyer is kind enough to nurture Descartes back to health. And in fact, Descartes and Meyer strike this interesting relationship where one learns from the other. And I mean, there's been a lot of Descartes bashing in the kind of transpersonal movement. So what if Descartes had really something to contribute? And what if what he had to contribute would really well fit together with the alchemical quest, except now it's got a different framework? And so as we come back, Descartes is coming back to life, cooperating with Michael Meyer. They then have a chance to really rewrite history at this point of bifurcation and rewrite it in such a way that if we were on this parallel string of events, we could now look back and say, well, what if the 30-year war had actually happened, putting us in a position where it never happened? Now, why did it not happen? My suggestion is Descartes fell in love with a woman here. Maybe it was the daughter of Rabbi Löw. And instead of having this 30-year war between two denominations of the Christian faith in their atavistic, patriarchal, women-debasing way, I could imagine that instead you have a black goddess cult developing instead, where the icon of the sacred marriage of women and of woman and man becomes the icon of a spiritual practice, center of which becomes the Black Lady of Loretto. Now we have a Loretto chapel here, a Loretto church here in Prague, which is very beautiful. And so we could imagine the string of history as it departs from the way we thought we know it, where the papacy becomes more and more cultish and insignificant, and the Pope just sort of a rambling guru who's walking down the streets of Rome, whereas the spiritual power shifts to this female black goddess worship, maybe with a female Pope, right here in Prague. Now, as this unrolls, of course, all that needed to happen to get us into our predicament would have taken a different course. We would have had alchemical modernity, a project whose time has definitely come. Probably by the beginning of the or the end of the 18th century, we would have been able to travel to the moon and have a sacred marriage somewhere in space based on not the exploitation of nature, but of the modern alchemical cooperation between mind, spirit, and matter. So all of this is to say, as we are awaking from Descartes' nightmare, and as Descartes himself awakes from his own nightmare, we may be at a point where we are well advised to think up, well, what do we need if the good ideas of alchemy, modernity, spiritual, marriage, feminine culture, partnership, versions of history, if they were no longer just an occult underground bohemian dream, but if they were the ingredients of a mainstream civilization that decides to take a different course than the one we find ourselves in right now.
Well, you're wound up on this, I can tell. It's certainly an interesting idea. I mean, it's not clear to me how closely linked the evolution of modern science and the wars of religion that the 30 Years' War represented were. I mean, some people might say, had there been no 30 Years' War, there still would have been a Newton, there still would have been a Copernicus. But I suspect that you're probably right, that the 30 Years' War somehow exhausted the medieval eschatology, and people were then ready for new forms of governments, new forms of social order. One of the reasons that I'm so keen to establish the Bohemian Institute here in Prague is because you really put your finger on it. I have the feeling that this is a kind of more than simply a city, but a kind of dimensional portal or nexus, and that many different futures beckon off the Prague nexus. I mean, we had the potential democracy of Jan Margarak in the 20s, the communist period, which now appears like a dream. It's like it never happened. So this seems to be a city where historicity and dream easily change places.
And many strange appearances and figures show up in this dream. I mean, you hear them coming right and left.
Well, the Prague was the European Jerusalem, and may be so again, because I think what Prague really represented was an equal sensitivity to spirit and matter. That what alchemy meant was the union of spirit and matter, and the secular chemistry that arose out of Cartesian thinking was just thoroughly materialistic. So you're right. The kinds of speculations that you're indulging in would be precisely the kinds of concerns that the Bohemian Institute would concern itself with. Because I think when we come back and stand in these historically pivotal places, then with sufficient vision and imagination, we can probably send history careening off in a slightly different direction.
Hooray. Well, then let's kiss this sleeping beauty awake.
Hey, I'm all for it. I would love to see the Prague Renaissance take place.
Okay,
Here's to it. Alchemy is an ancient art, one of the magical arts associated with dyeing and the gilding of metals, and tracing its origins back to ancient Egypt. But its modern culmination is here in the city of Prague, where in the 16th century, under the patronage of the Emperor Rudolf, the great alchemists of Europe gathered and pursued their art. Including Kepler. Alchemy is more than a technique for the conversion of base metals into gold. It is the culminating metaphor in the search for a union of spirit and matter. And whether or not this union was ever achieved is as mysterious as much of the rest of this ancient city. But whatever the success of the alchemists, they provide us with a metaphor for spiritual transformation that is extraordinarily applicable in the modern era. It was for this reason that the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung made alchemical motifs as important a part of his theory of the unconscious as the contents of dreams or folklore. You see, before modern science, the separation between observer and observed was more naively understood than in our own world. And the alchemist, staring into the swirling content of his retorts and his alembics, was seeing in his own imagination not the processes of natural chemistry, but an intermingling of psychological processes and material processes in a domain of epistemic confusion that we have grown distant from. Nevertheless, the legacy of our own science is one of pollution of the earth, toxification of the oceans. Something has been lost from the Western vision of nature by the exclusion of the notion of spirit. And it's fitting that in an effort to recapture that lost something, we return to Prague, the center of European occult thinking, and a beacon to any future thinking on these matters. Thought. You've mentioned this concept, the ecological imagination.
Yeah.
So obviously this is sort of the distillate for you of
Yes.
some of your thinking.
Yes.
So say something about it. What is it exactly?
Well, it's an imagination where the image itself has many different realities constellated within it. It isn't an image that you're trying to impose on the world. It's an image that's received after you've remained quiet and you're willing to pay attention to the miracle of creation as it is. Now, that miracle may take the form of despair and alienation as it has over the last 60 years, but you pay attention to it. You know, we live in a monocultural society where you plant wheat in one field and you spray down on either side so you get one crop. And the soil, which comes from the same root as the word soul, suffers as a result. You know, in the eastern Palouse of Washington State, they've lost 25 to 50 feet of topsoil, you know, through intensive mining, almost mining agriculture. You know, here we are in the botanic gardens in Prague, where plants have been brought from all over the world. In some ways, it's a wish by humanity to recreate the beauty and imagination of the rainforest, or of an ecology that where things fit together exquisitely. Mm-hmm. And we have this inside us. We have this patterning, this understanding that the world fits together absolutely exquisitely, and we have a possibility of fitting together too. So the poet remains silent, looks out at the world, receives all the images that comes in, and tries to say the one word that represents the whole ecology of everything that is received, and hopefully will give birth to that world in the word, in the line.
This suggests somehow that the word is made flesh, or in your metaphor, the flesh is made word.
Yes, or the word is made ecology.
The word is made ecology. Well, so this is an aesthetic of nature, almost Emersonian in its scope. This is a far cry from futurism or the glorification of the technological that a lot of 20th century poetics has been about.
Yes.
Do you see yourself as a part of a conservative impulse in poetry or a reforming impulse? How does that work?
No, I don't see it as being conservative. It may be looked at that way from the areas of art which, say, Andy Warhol inhabited, where the whole emphasis was on the latest wave that was breaking on the shore.
Fashion.
Yes, fashion, and the whole sea that was behind each wave as it came upon the shore was ignored. And so I think what there is now is a resting back, a swimming out, a diving down into that sea to re-establish our eldership. I think much of what's happening in the 20th century is a re-establishment of eldership. I mean, here we are in Prague. Prague has been asleep, almost like Rip Van Winkle for the last 40 years.
Anyway, 40 years,
Yes.
possibly longer.
And it's awaking again. It's awaking, and there's so much awaking in the world today. And I think poetry has always been the art where you remind people of what life is about and what is essential to it, and what's, as Pericles said, what is sweet and what is terrible about life, that you have to know both those things. And the poet ignores neither. So hopefully it's not the kind of conservatism where you're trying to go back to some Edenic, Rousseauistic past where everyone can gather under one oak tree and discuss the problems of the village. That's never going to happen. But the poet he does not hide, or she does not hide, the beauty of life, and does not hide the alienation. You know, this century we've had tremendous emphasis on looking into the cracked mirror of alienation and saying, look at where we are. I mean, Eliot's The Wasteland was all about that. But there's another side to it too. You can only do that for so long, otherwise you have no more impetus to go on.
That there has to be, here, let's go up here.
Yeah.
There has to be some kind of healing. There can only be so much of this existential angst and Well,
you see, Sartre, he came up to a tree, you said, and he put his finger on the tree and he said, life is absurd because I cannot understand that tree, I cannot get my soul into that tree. Well, the Zen patriarchs have been talking about this for 1500 years, and you weren't supposed to get your consciousness into the tree. You are supposed to pay such tremendous attention to the tree that it came to find you.
yes,
in the end,
Sartre
yes.
said nature is mute, which
Yeah.
is to me one of the most amazing statements any 20th century philosopher has made in terms of defining alienation. I think that would have to be it.
Well, I don't think the French have been very successful with their philosophers over the last 350 years. If I was to make a
they
prejudiced
are
statement.
they're welded to materialism. Well, so at this conference, there's been a lot of talk about hope. Where do the poets come down? Are you singing a funeral dirge for a world passing away, or is this the bright birth of the new young prince?
Well, hopefully, hopefully neither in some ways, because you simply have to speak life as it is. So at this time we're speaking tremendous change. We're speaking the stakes are very high. You can fail in life. An individual human being can fail in life. A species can fail in life. I mean, in some ways we always live out our destiny, no matter what we do. It just depends what level you want to live out that destiny. Do you want to live out your destiny on the level of frustration? Because you can do that. Or do you want to step further and deeper into it? So poetry always says the stakes are very high. And it relies on the fact that life itself is magnificent. You speak about the magnificence of life. Not in a Pollyannish sense, or in a sense in which you're going to ignore all the difficulties and terrible beauties of life, but in the sense that it's magnificent because you can fail at it, and we as a species can fail. So the hope of the poet is that you can speak to the magnificence of life such that people will be reminded that life is magnificent and you can fail at it, and the stakes are very, very high, the stakes of your life.
So that's almost a bardic manifesto. Well, do you feel moved to speak some poetry? We'll move from talking about poetry to speaking poetry.
Yes, well, we spoke about the tree earlier and having the world come and find you, and I'm reminded of a very simple poem, but this is a very powerful poem for me. It's a teaching story actually out of the Northwest Indian tradition, where The story is there to tell a young boy or girl what to do when they're lost in the forest, or to answer the question. When the young boy or girl asks the question, "What do I do when I'm lost in the forest?" the elder tells this story. It's been rendered into marvelous modern English by David Wagoner, who has the chair of poetry at the University of Washington in the Northwest United States. And it's a very simple poem called "Lost." And here it says, "Take the burden off your shoulders," basically, this story. And he says, the young boy or girl says to the elder, "What do I do when I'm lost in the forest?" And the elder says, "Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost." Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are, it's called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. Listen, listen. The forest breathes. It whispers, "I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here." Saying here. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, then you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you to David Wagoner and the Salish elders from the Northwest.
Well, you give it life.
But the Zen patriarchs used to say that if you go out and confirm the 10,000 things, this is delusion. If the 10,000 things come and confirm you, this is enlightenment. Now, I wish one had been around to mention this to Sartre. In the 1930s, they might have understood that the Germans were at their border, and they could have.
Well, we could have avoided a painful moment in history, for sure. Well, thank you for coming and talking to us. We've been talking with David White, poet, shaman, philosopher. Thanks very much,
Thank
David.
you. Wonderful to be here in Prague with you.
Well, it's nice to have a chance to talk to you again. You did that very well. Great.
Terence, can I get you to stay there just for a sec where you were with David?
They want us back right here.
Don't talk and just give me 10 seconds or 20 seconds of
Okay, don't talk.
Ambiance.
It's an easy assignment. Did you see have you had a chance to appreciate all this Jugendstil architecture?
Oh yes, it's astonishing,
amazing.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Terrence, I need the sound just of the water. Okay, you're free to talk.
Are we free to move?
Yeah.
Are you done with us?
Can talent move? Hold it. Yeah, go ahead and move.
Okay, good. That's it. Well, that was... We make it look easy.
Yes, we'll have to do some more.
Couldn't hear it.
Oh no, you can't hear it.
If you were to do it again, I would say heaven will not stop.
It's all through the marvel of the bug.
Action. Yeah, spiritual intuition. That's really what I do. It's
That's
not
much better. It doesn't tie you up with all that woo-woo stuff.
Madame Lasagnas, like Jim said.
Madame Lasagna.
Yes.
I'm having coffee with Anne Armstrong, an old friend of mine from excellent days. Anne is a beloved psychic and has a pretty impeccable reputation as a seer, which is a difficult line of work.
Right, yes.
How are you enjoying Prague?
I'm enjoying it very much. It's one of the most beautiful cities I have ever seen. I'm very impressed. And needless to say, the vibes are very intense. You know, if you tune into it psychically and get the full impact of what's here, it's a tremendous feeling. I've had similar experiences in Europe, in Rome, but when I went through the Jewish cemetery, that was quite a thing for me. It's almost like you can just feel all the pain and the sorrow and deprivation that those poor people went through. So.
Yes, at Prague, it's really a paradox. You know, it was said that under communism, it was the gloomiest city in Europe.
Yeah.
And yet, it seems pretty vibrant. Do you have a notion of how this situation is moving here? Or what sort of a future do you envision for the Czechs?
Well, I feel especially Prague is like an open door, a gateway that I feel is allowing people to finally express, you know, their deep feelings, how they felt, without feeling, you know, being censored in any way. So I have, you know, it's just like all of a sudden a whole other part of their life is coming into perspective, and certainly I feel the sense of spirituality here. To everyone that you talk to, everybody's interested. You can't communicate fluently, but you certainly feel from them that they're hungry for this, and that it's certainly a rare opportunity for them.
Well, when you look into the past of Czechoslovakia, certainly it's been a long, hard road to hoe.
Right.
Can you look toward the future and see any difference, or is it the same story again?
I think there will remain an underlying sameness because we're used to certain ways of being. But I also feel that the more the more adventuresome individuals, the more knowing, you know, like sense of deep knowing individuals, will begin to see everything very differently. And I look for them to become the leaders for the rest of the people. Like to say, you experience it this way, but I'm experiencing it this way, and let's go from there. So I do feel very hopeful, and I'm aware how beautiful these people are. I just get weepy when I look at that. They're just radiant, beautiful people that have been oppressed and are now finally having an opportunity to be liberated. And it's, you know, slow. Change comes very slowly, but I feel that it will happen. That it's going to happen for them, and it's time, and they deserved it. They've worked for it. It's like their bad karma may be over with.
It feels like it may be over.
Yeah.
At least for the Bohemian part of Czechoslovakia.
That's right.
I'm loath to ask this, but perverse curiosity overcomes me. What about our own sad union?
Well, this is one of the things that anytime I go into a deep space, I take a look at. And even though we see like hopeful rays of light, you know, in our part of the world, I'm also seeing the other side. And since on occasion I'm able to tune into a much deeper level, like a more esoteric level of seeing, I'm aware that we have a certain time frame, and the time is kind of running out, so that unless there is a big switch, you know, to owning our power and our spirituality and our light, that we're on the brink of disaster, and this really concerns me a lot. I know just the earthquake activity in California has been something, and I look for more.
So you're not talking about political or economic disaster.
No.
You're talking about something more an act of God,
Yeah,
almost.
that's right. because it seems that what brings people together is when we have disasters, when we have a need, to support each other. And I would hate to see it come to that, to that place where we actually have a tremendous disaster, illness, or for instance, like AIDS becomes even more prevalent, where we will have to band together. And
well, some people feel that the undoing of the Soviet Union can really be traced to the Chernobyl meltdown.
I think it can. Everything has a result.
Well, now, didn't someone here at this conference, this seems to me like a recurring theme. It's the idea that things are going to get worse before they get better, because there needs to be some kind of shock of awakening.
That's what I feel, is that somehow, as long as we're comfortable, we're very complacent, but when all of a sudden our life is threatened, and just our general environment is threatened, then we rise up in arms. We get, we become very activated, and I'm just hoping that somehow we won't have to come to that point before we will all see, we will all see the same picture together and do something about it. And I'm always asking myself, what can you do about it? And so Jim and I, of course, spread the word. Under the guise of teaching people to be intuitive, we slip a lot of the spiritual teaching into it, in the sense of individual responsibility. But ultimately, I think that what needs to happen, I think one of the speakers mentioned this, was that somehow we do have that essence within us, that power within us, that I feel is equivalent to the atom bomb. I feel that the atom bomb was simply an externalization of, what we have inside of us, and that what we have inside of us is greater, and that if we can have awareness of that part of the self and use it, project it out there, create more light, perhaps we will invite some friendlier forces.
So really, it seems like what you're saying is intuition is simply an opening to what is already there.
What is already there, and this is the reason that, we do stress our intuition workshops, is because it's like it gives you a lens to look through. It's a way of getting into a deeper, larger part of yourself, but you can also use it, for exploring other dimensions of consciousness, personally. Not just read about it, but personally. And this is what is fascinating.
Do you think that, it's clear we're all motivated to try and do something to try and make the world better,
right.
But what I worry about is there enough urgency?
I don't think there is yet.
So
unfortunately, I don't think there is.
We're still half asleep.
Yes, and I feel that one of these days Mother Nature may get very impatient, shake her back, and we'll get it. And perhaps we need it. Perhaps we have to be, done that too. We have to be done too before we wake up and say, okay, what's important in my life? Because I feel so many people have lost sense of personal responsibility, having fun, and all the outer things are what are so important, rather than the true meaning for their life, and that is their life script, and to find out who they are, and how they can get there, and how they can contribute.
So people have been distracted by the surface.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. And that really concerns me, but I say I don't know what more we can do about it, except do what you can on an individual basis. But we are in a crisis.
Well, with the collapse of communism, now there are no competing value systems other than the work, spend, stuff, fun approach to things. Whatever one thinks of communism, a lot of traditional culture was preserved in a kind of economic deep freeze.
Yes,
I'm sure Czechoslovakia is headed toward more comfort, more consumer electronics, but are they headed toward happiness?
Well, that's what I've been looking at. All of these new things, these new choices that they have, and all of a sudden you're free and you can buy and you can imitate the United States, and that's a concern, you know, because some of the values that I find here are very deep and ancient, and I feel have a tremendous amount of create stability in a society, and they may be taken away, and that is a concern.
Sold out.
Sold out.
Sold out.
For something different, right?
Yes, well, in a way, these people are no different from rainforest Indians or
That's right.
Tibetans
That's
or
right.
whatever
Yeah.
of cultural worth they have. We will package and export, and everything else will be devalued.
That's what happens. I would like to say a little bit about intuition,
Please.
because I feel that most people, you know, you read about it or you hear the people, hint at it, and you know that you have this ability inside of you, like you have the perfect plan inside of you, and yet there isn't, an easy way to get to it, except through arduous years and years and years of meditation. So what we try to do is to do it in a more playful way, to literally trick people into finding out that, hey, they can really see, they can really know without ever having the other person say anything. And I feel like it's a way of getting people into that space so that later on there will be curiosity, there will be a lot of curiosity, and the curiosity may lead them to a deeper search, of themselves. And that's our gig.
So really, what you're couching as intuition is self-awareness.
Exactly. Self-growth, self-awareness, appreciation of that part of yourself.
But it's much easier to rope people in if you sell it as a power
It's
rather
more
than
glamorous.
a cure.
It's more glamorous, yeah. And but the thing is to get the audience and then talk to them.
To get them to take the
Get them to
medicine
take it
by
and to
any
realize that somehow, it's in there. It's in there. And I feel that the way we do it in a kind of playful way, but also we don't, glamorize it. We don't say there's certain steps that have to be taken. But most of the time, the bottom line, we say do it. And they don't challenge, they don't question, and they do it. And this has been very, very gratifying for me, because out of that has come a lot of people in the world now that came to that part of themselves, like their task that they gave themselves, if there's such a thing. And they're out doing it because they found out that they had this thing inside of us, this quality of restlessness, and all of a sudden there's a form for it.
So it sounds like a lot of what you do is give permission to people feel what is all there.
Yeah, and in the private work that I do, what I usually go for, what are the blocks that are keeping that person from realizing their greater potential? And so in a sense, it's a combination of psychological work as well as spirituality and self-responsibility.
Well, and I think you provide an example.
I try.
Well, you do a good job.
Well, I think I provide an example in that for the first about 25 or 30 years of my life, I was very ill, and I didn't know what the nature of my illness was. Nobody, Mayo Clinic, and the fine doctors could not find out. And actually, what was happening to me is that I was suppressing my intuitive ability, my psychic ability.
Trying to fit in.
Yeah, well, I didn't know I had it. I started this business a long time ago, so I was kind of a closet psychic. But as a child, I had these feelings and these knowings, but there was nowhere, no gurus around, no way to check it out. And until, the law of synchronicity began to operate in my life, and I found the right therapist, and I did some regression work, and found out some of the past lives that apparently were still reaching into the present and affecting me. And the outcome was that I healed myself of everything that I had wrong with me. So that's one of the things that I try to push. Like, what is your illness teaching you? What is it trying to tell you? How can you get past it? And once you get past it, once you get rid of the blocks, then the real stuff that you're here to do or inspired to do will come out. And that's exactly what happened to me. Before that, I felt powerless.
So because you had this as a direct experience, it gave
Very,
you great
yeah.
conviction to speak to
Yes,
other people
that's
about
right. That it's possible. Not all illnesses, are connected with a spiritual emergence, but a lot of them are. It's the way that our soul somehow gets our attention through pain.
through distorting the physical form.
Right,
in
until
some
we ask
way.
enough questions and say what's going on, and when we're ready to hear, it's there. It's all there.
Well, maybe we could make a hopeful metaphor and expand that to the global level
Yes, that's what I hope for.
and say,
Yeah.
the earth is trying to get our attention. I mean, surely all of nature
It's
must
trying
be
to
crying,
get, crying
out at this moment.
I have, in my intuitive state, tuned into Mother Nature, because you can tune into any form, any system. And what she has said to me is that I'm sad. I'm very, very sad. It's almost like, I'm being destroyed, being consumed in some very negative ways. And that's not my function. My function is to provide a wonderful living space for us to grow in.
So generally, are you hopeful about human fate, or do you
I have a lot of faith in individuals. I really do, because I feel that once we wake up, we're movers and we do things. So I think the trick is, how do you wake more people up all at once?
So the real situation is that the real struggle to save the planet has not yet begun.
I don't think so.
We're still drifting.
We're still drifting. We still haven't gotten the point that we are in a tremendous crisis.
And once we get everybody awakened to that and
Yes.
focused, this is exactly what I think, that it's going to take some terrible
Some
thing.
disaster. Yes.
100,000 people could die in a hot
Absolutely.
afternoon in Mexico City.
It's no doubt about it. And that is a constant concern of mine. But I'm very gratified about all these. What is the thing that happened on New Year's Day, or what was where all the people band together and prayed at the same time. All of that, I feel, is like wonderful light energy that is being sent up. In other words, because I feel that the higher forces cannot reach down to us. They can only come down to a certain level. So we have to elevate ourselves to meet them, have some kind of a meeting ground. And if we can get there, the whole thing can be shifted in a matter of hours or minutes. But,
well, H.G. Wells said history is a race between education and catastrophe.
Right.
And it looks to me like it's going to be a photo finish.
I think it will be, yeah. But I still have faith that somehow, we're heartful enough and loving enough and caring enough to see the real picture.
That there must be a purpose in the human adventure. It isn't just.
It isn't just an adventure. No, it is. But the goal is enlightenment, you see, and I'm not sure that we've gotten that message that clearly yet, that clearly defined.
Well, it's hard to tell whether we're collectively moving toward some kind of global enlightenment, or we're simply moving toward ruination of everything.
Well, the whole thing is attitude. It depends upon how we feel, what we do, what we think in the next few years as to what the outcome will be.
Where you say attitude, I would say it's language.
Language, yeah.
You can't live a future you can't describe.
That's right.
So we have to stimulate the heart and the imagination.
The mind has to have a target that it understands, and I think as yet we have not gotten that target. Little pockets of people here and there, of course, have it.
But no general vision has emerged.
No, that's right.
Well, thank you very much
You're
for
very
stopping
welcome.
by.
Yeah,
This was lots
I'm
of
glad.
fun.
I'm glad I did this. Yes.
Good. Well, wait till you
Okay.
see it on the telly. Hopefully, you change a few minds. If you
I
change
hope so.
even one mind.
Well, I've managed to do a lot of that.
Thanks
dear.
very much.
You're
yeah.
welcome. Now I can.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
they have to
I'm always running off with.
fix the plumbing.
I still can have that. That's
You
mine.
can still have that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's yours. This is a high budget operation. You're looking at your profit and residuals.
Oh, is that it? Well, okay. It tastes it's the best food I've had since I got here.
Well, I don't know. Here's Prague. Here it is. I mean, this is the city of the alchemists. This is old Bohemia on the brink of the third millennium.
Life and Homes of Richard Marx.
Strolling through the park. Amazing. All of these places. American hospitality. Two guys, that's great, in front of that door.
My house.
Oh, is it?
Right there.
Are you on the third floor? Uh-huh. This is nice. This is a very nice area of art galleries and small
Go to your right now.
antiquarians, like here.
Yeah.
Look,
Well, this gallery is kind of like,
it's not so nice.
no, it's really fun. But there's a gallery around the corner.
Oh, and this gallery, this is a really fancy operation.
Yeah, this is.
That ensemble of towers here as you approach the old city wall. This is the thing that Havel and his friends were associated with before they got into the government. They always hung out at this little cafe and plotted revolution, and then they became the government. Quite a building here that you enter into the bridge. There's the house.
Das wäre doch was für den Jürgen, der Waldläufer.
This is a good bookstore.
Come right after the trolley then. Jack, keep moving.
Well, I don't know. Here's Prague. Here it is. I mean, this is the city of the alchemists. This is old Bohemia on the brink of the third millennium. They call Prague the city of towers. You can really see why. From the 16th century onward, it looked like this, with these Baroque towers piercing the skyline. This is the neighborhood I would choose to live in, I think, right here. It's near and a part of everything, but these are quiet streets away from the flow of some nice little fourth-story apartment with Jugendstile appointments. That'd be all right, I think. So this is Prague on an early Sunday morning in summer. But the calm is deceptive. I mean, this country is on the brink of falling to pieces. It may break in two while we're here this week. One of the challenges of keeping Prague beautiful is keeping modern buildings from interrupting this skyline. Otherwise, it'll be Manhattanized and destroyed. They need to designate Prague 1, that zone, as unbuildable, I think. A really funny part of town. Why? Because there would be no reason to be in this part of town unless you had made a mistake. Yes.
Well, there
so many parts of town that depend on people making a mistake of going there.
I guess that's true.
Most parts of towns are like that.
Now, is this familiar territory here?
Well,
Yes, I bet it is. I think this is where...
well, it's either right or left here.
The place where we come out of the tunnel.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for, is the place.
Yeah, except
Yeah,
now
but
they
that's
tell
not
me,
very visible.
Isn't it
It's
right up
sunken
here?
down.
It's right up here.
And you go left, maybe.
yeah, that's the only way I can.
That looks good.
No, this is totally... Maybe down around that corner, Mickey.
I think
Got
it's the
that
other
the next
direction.
corner.
Of course it's the other direction, because the tunnel was over there and we went this way, so... But we should be kind of on the hill that the tunnel goes underneath. No, I think the tunnel comes from the left there. I think we're perfectly
Here
all
we
right.
are. I think it's right around this corner, dead ahead.
See, we've got all these...
There's the girl and the billboard and the whole thing.
There's
It's
the
straight
girl.
ahead. So the...
How was that?
Give me the cue.
Okay, maybe you have to come back a little bit. Terence, come back like out of frame.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay, roll camera.
Rolling. Speed.
Action.
Fragmentary localism where you have one level of loyalty to your local community and the next level up is the whole planet, and there's nothing in between, no state, no nation, just a planetary consciousness and a community consciousness.
We have speed. 5 seconds.
Well, Victor, tell me, what's the most interesting idea that you've encountered here in Prague? Has there been anything stunning?
Yeah, probably yes. I want to establish a new organization in Russia. When I'm just coming to Russia, and I want to do a new organization in Russia. It's Russian Transpersonal Center. And the most interesting idea which came to me here was it's just a special way how does these organizations must function, right? And I cannot just I cannot define this idea directly, but it's definitely will be a new ways to connect, new ways to concern goals of these organizations. There is no boundaries, real boundaries between us. It's like axiom, and this is probably the basis of on which we can grow up the way of functioning these kind of organizations. Dancing? Yes,
Sure, yeah,
great.
I
I'm sure you understand.
No, I
way.
understand.
No question.
Well, so you feel that these transpersonal ideas could have an impact in Russia as it undergoes whatever social evolution it's going to undergo?
Yeah. Also, it doesn't matter. Will everybody can accept this kind of functioning, this kind of ideas? No matter, accept or not. But anyway, this idea will be, and it will be real, because it's like general. It's more close to general way of all nature.
So
I think so. I hope.
So you mean it's almost explicit in the order of things? Yeah, I agree. So some kind of ever-present organic order is emerging. Yeah, this was why I thought it was interesting that Denmark voted against the EC, because I think European federalism is the old style of government, and that fragmentary localism, where you have one level of loyalty to your local community and the next level up is the whole planet, and there's nothing in between, no state, no nation, just a planetary consciousness and a community consciousness.
Yeah, because on our biological level, we have to solve our problems, which grows up from our ego, and this is the main point of our difficulties.
The ego.
Yeah. But also on social level, there is probably the most problem is egos of organization, egos of countries, of states, and probably if we solve this kind of connections,
so institutional,
right, it will be more appropriate for our life,
right?
Like as social objects.
Absolutely. Do you know Franco de Leo?
No, just
this is
time
Victor Rubel.
Nice to meet you.
Franco did a lot of, in fact, the only research allowed on LSD in the United States in the late 70s, early 80s?
Early 80s.
And was that at NIMH?
Well, NIMH never gave the funding, but it was an FDA-approved study, and it was approved also by the University of Maryland. And it was a protocol that took several years to develop to get approved by the FDA. It involved up to 10 sessions of LSD, and a standard dose of 400 micrograms in one group and 25 in the control group. The other study was more open-ended with cancer patients, where we were trying to change the research to variate for the experience rather than the drug. And we had data that showed that people that had a certain type of experience would do better with anxiety and depression and pain. So we wanted to use patients as their own controls and control for the experience. When the experience happened, and we had an instrument that we developed to try to measure when the experience took place, then we would measure this psychometrically what the effects were. And there was a better, more open-ended study, because I always felt that we shouldn't be controlling for the dosage. This is not a drug reaction. It's not a matter of just giving the drug.
It's
what
a
we claimed is that certain experience that resulted from the administration of the drug correlated with positive results. And vice versa, if somebody were to activate some childhood trauma, didn't quite complete it, you might expect them to be depressed for a couple of weeks afterwards until they could get back in and complete it. So it would be a mistake to say, let's just give this dosage and then measure the effect, because it wasn't a question of dosage, it was a question of the nature of the experience that was activated and how that affected a personality. So we were able to do that with the cancer patients, to have to use the patients at their own controls and then measure what we call the peak experience. Right? Walter Pahnke, it was a theologian and a physician and psychiatrist that started this research at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, and he had developed a scale based on the literature on mysticism from various people. And they found that if on this scale people had at least 60%, you could conclude that they had a peak experience. So there was a way then to say, okay, if you were above 60%, were you different in terms of what you showed on the MMPI scale of anxiety and depression before and after? And in fact, it was measurable. The people that had a peak experience, their psychometric testing was much improved compared to the ones that didn't. And the next phase then was, okay, if you don't get a peak experience, then can you get one if you continue treatment? Because there is a whole process here. It's not, you're not just dealing with, the drug is just the key that is opening the door to some inner process that could unfold with time. And it's conceivable very well that if people were not pickers to begin with, may convert to be pickers in future sessions, or that initial pickers could become more robust pickers with continued treatment, so that the initial results would be more permanent for some people. But that required a lot more sessions, because I think that the work that Stan did here in Czechoslovakia showed that individual may require between 15 and 80 sessions. So that's essentially where the research was stalled, because it was very difficult to get beyond 10 sessions from the FDA.
So do you get the feeling that it's opening up again because of these things going on in Switzerland and Strassman's stuff in New Mexico?
Well, I have the feeling, there is a need for more effective treatment in psychiatry. There are a lot of conditions that we cannot affect very well today. So everybody knows, that people will go on the rest of their life
in some kind of twilight
misery and pain, and they may get better for a while, then they lose it, and it's a sort of like trying to plug oils in a boat that is sinking.
At
some point, you have to say, maybe we can restructure the whole boat rather than keep on putting all this energy. And there's tremendous effort. There's social worker. It's a whole social system trying to put scaffoldings to hold these people to a level of functioning where they may not have to end up in a hospital where it costs $500.
So you're saying for the worst reasons we may finally get good social policy?
Because we do need it. You see, the fact is that we need something more effective than what we have. Now, at what point will the profession say, we have to look into research that's already been documented to look for what might be a way out of this dilemma, because economically society's been drained from providing, and any person that has to be rehospitalized is going to involve thousands of dollars. Just everybody gets a physical examination, they get laboratory work, they get the activity therapist evaluates them, the social worker evaluates them, the psychiatrist evaluates them. So it doesn't matter if they're coming in for 2 days or if it's the 20th time or the 30th time, they still get the same. And that's what's draining the system, And so we have to find a way to prevent the illness from either going further or to revert back. We need people to be independent.
So this means pharmacology is due for some kind of a mini renaissance, probably, or psychopharmacology.
I would think so, because now I think it's the phase where they're trying to look for the better thorazine, the better antidepressant, and that's okay. There's going to be a number of people that are functioning fairly well.
But you're talking about psychedelically assisted therapy of some
which is
sort.
different, which would be to treat the personality.
Right, to treat the personality.
And when you get to treating the personality, I think more or less people are conceding that there is no actual way to treat it right now, and that it's a waste of hospital money to hospitalize the patient for a character disorder, because you're not going to solve
any of their problems.
Hospitalization. And we have evidence from the work done at the center with LSD or the MDA and the dipropytryptamine that these very severe character disorders suddenly, with the effect of the drug, could begin to make sense of why they develop their personality. They develop based on the experience that they had growing up, and now you have a patient who says, I could see why. I remember one case where it says it was called the black sheep of the family. Well, in fact, it did become the black sheep of the family.
Of course.
And then, but they can begin to make a connection that it's not in their psyche. I think the character disorder doesn't know why they're doing what they're doing, why they're motivated to do certain things. In a way, they're alienated from their inner self. And if you try to do therapy with them, they'll laugh at you because they know that you can't verbally induce them to have anything that is very meaningful. You see, so frequently they don't show up for appointments, and because they and the same person, if you can induce them to have a real therapeutic session, you have a patient.
Right.
If you say, I'll see you Monday at 8, they'll be there because now they know there is a history and there is a way to undo it.
So it's just a matter of reaching them.
And that's the important thing, because I think there is a lot of issues. For instance, when you get involved with psychopathy and there's criminality involved. People that get sent into institution and they're declared not guilty for reason of insanity. At this stage of the game, as I understand it, there is no real reason to release them, because there is no way that any psychiatrist could say, I've cured this person and I can guarantee you that he won't do it. You see, and we're still doing it, but I don't think there is a real basis there. We're sort of saying this person wasn't really that criminal and we can take a chance on this person again. Now, if you had a way of really solving the pathology
then you'd have
sustaining,
something.
then you'll have something solid to say. I think this person went for this.
Okay, Jack, I can feel Jack getting nervous down here.
Yeah, we have a lot of.
But this is good.
It is good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you should go for a walk.
Not at all.
I am. Yeah.
Good. Asking people about is basically what sort of ideas or what's been most interesting or astonishing about being in Prague at this conference. So there's your assignment.
Being in Prague, the energy of the city and the opening that's happening, and just that you can feel it. People are starting to come, out in the street. I woke up this morning to hearing children's voices playing in a playground downstairs, and it was so much fun. It was like this energy and little kids, and I looked down and they were making these wonderful designs with rocks on the sidewalk, and it's the same kind of thing that I hear when I'm in kids in the United States, but it had this joyfulness and an energy in it. And meeting my friends here again. I am part of an international community of people doing work with sacred substances, and I never get to meet them very often. And so when we meet each other, there's a lot of stimulation and heartfelt, warm connections that we don't make otherwise.
The theme of this conference was actually pretty heavy duty. Do you think it comes off as optimistic, pessimistic, naive, or how would you describe
I think that the theme was perfect because it's ambiguous enough to bring all of those together. And I think all of those energies are happening now, and that's why it is optimistic and pessimistic and hopeless and hopeful, and it has all of the energy of all the ambiguity and the tensions involved with all of those various polarities sort of swirling around and creating like an energy. It feels almost like a little bit like an energy vortex that's happening, where energies from opposite poles come around and mix together. And I liked Richard Tarnas's talk on male and female coming together, and it made me feel a little bit like the way when the sperm comes up to the egg, and there's this kind of vibration that happens, and it sort of feels a little bit like that kind of energy where it's just fertilization.
Full of potential.
Right.
So where are you going when you leave Czechoslovakia? Are you going back?
Well, we're going to go back home, and I've been re-inspired to work on a lot of projects that we have. We're in the middle of putting together plans for a protocol to use LSD with substance abusers, where we've been given permission by the government, but we still have to go through a review panel that has yet to, we haven't figured out how to put that together yet.
So you'll be doing a human studies work with LSD and alcoholism.
And other substance abuse. People need to have the diagnosis of substance abuse. What that means in that person's life, we'll find out when we work with them, but at least to the rest of the world, that's what their diagnosis is, and it allows us to have them enter the study.
Where will this go on?
Probably in Baltimore, Maryland.
Well, that's wonderful. Do you think it means there's a general loosening of attitude or a recognition?
I think there's more chaos. It's a little bit of, it's more that people don't know how to regard it, and it may be that there's some opening in terms of a few more reasonable people who have a little bit more openness to it. They're still pretty paranoid. They want to be able to trust who's doing the work, and how can they trust people if they're doing psychedelic work? So there's still the same catch-22 involved in it.
Of course.
So,
well, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
Okay. Hope you have fun in Prague.
Yes, I will. You too.
Yeah, I am. Are you going to get out to the countryside at all?
Well, we're probably going to go out on Thursday and visit some things out in the country.
There's a spa at Carlsbad in Western Bohemia, and Castle Karlstein, an hour south of here, is a famous Rosicrucian castle that was involved in kinds of European occult history.
Sounds like
it's neat. It's different. You should really see Bohemia while you're here.
Yeah. I wish we had made plans to go back a lot later. You know, we're leaving on Saturday. So
too bad. Yeah, you should have put a week in there just to wander around the countryside. Well, thanks for stopping by.
My audience is over there, and I'm talking to Terence.
Well, you're talking to Terence.
You have two camera position. And then my arches failed.
So what are we going to talk about?
Well, I'm going to ask you what has been interesting or unexpected about Prague, or how you feel about this whole scene. Is it more frivolous Euro trash, self-congratulatory prosuestry, or hard-won veterans of the true revolution gathering together in the foxholes?
So let's go. Now we begin.
Could you repeat that?
Yes, I was saying, what do you make of the conference? Do you see it as born-again Euro trash posuestry, or hard-won veterans of the true revolution gathering in the foxholes of Eastern Europe to plot our next assault on the barricades?
I see it as a kind of combination between...
Quite.
Yeah. It's a kind of melange, you know? It's kind of a mixture of all of these things. I've actually been having, the hardest time I've been having is trying to figure out if I'm in Disneyland or Paris or Moscow.
You mean because Prague is sort of like a interference pattern formed of all three.
Yes.
It's gnomish bohemian quaintness overlaid. It's dark Central European angst.
Yeah, and I sort of have, don't you have this feeling it's sort of like a front? And that if you go, it's so incredibly beautiful, and then if you go about 3 miles outside of the boundary, it's going to like be overalls. I mean, you don't see any overalls in town. You see a few of the workmen on the scaffold.
Have you been into the countryside?
Only on the train.
No, well, I'll tell you, to my mind, what the metaphor for Czechoslovakia is it's Oz. It's the green country with the emerald capital city, with the great palace and the little wizard inside, and all the happy munchkins of Bohemia farming and making cheese and carrying on with their butter and eggs and so on.
But are they happy out there?
Well, they're splitting the country apart, but more power to them, I say.
You think so?
Sure. The people who most want to leave are the poorer, more uneducated, unindustrialized half of the country.
Right.
So if they want to get rid of all this highly developed pseudo-Western European land on the western end of things, probably it's a good thing.
I heard this wonderful story. Do you know this story? That I don't know when this was, but many years ago, the language had completely disappeared. And one man took it upon himself to resuscitate the language. So he went kind of crawling out into the backwoods and found these tiny little villages where just a few of the old people remembered Czechoslovakian language. And he wrote it down and cataloged it and taught it to people, and they taught it to people, and people started teaching it to the children again. And the entire language was resuscitated from this one man's kind of pilgrimage to the sort of residuals of where the language had been stored.
That's interesting.
Isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
And it's a story because it feels it has the potential to be metaphorical for our time. You know, when we're just right on the brink of that loss, you know?
Well, and bringing back a lost language means presumably you bring back the possibility of thoughts that could not be said any other way.
That's right.
So it's like reality itself. You are saving it. You're bringing it back.
Yes, or things like the gene pool of plants, or it feels so metaphorical to me, and it was a successful story. And here we are, and everyone's speaking Czech.
Yes, well, you know, you scratch a Czech and you find a Celt, because the reason these people look vaguely Irish is because the Celts were here 6,000 years ago, long before they reached the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and migrated into England. This was Celtic country. All these round hills that you see have Celtic forts on them,
Really?
6, 7, 8,000 years old. So it's kind of interesting.
From the 12th century, 13th century, 12th century?
No, thousands of years.
Thousands? Oh,
yeah, 6,000
years.
old. No, we're talking deep prehistory here. Old Maria Gimbutas' bailiwick.
Yeah.
Well, so where are you going after Prague?
Maybe going to Berlin, maybe to Carlsbad. I don't know yet. I'm open. I think the conference is interesting. Were you asking about that?
Yeah, what's the most interesting thing you've run across?
Well, I don't know if there's the most interesting thing, but I think I wonder about the question about that no one seems to be asking about whether or not, you know, when transpersonal psychology first hit, we all had the very optimistic feeling that this was going to make a big dent in the movement of history, just like we all did during the 60s revolution, that this was somehow going to blossom into some major transformation of essentially how people treated each other. And it feels like now these conferences have been going on for, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years?
At least that long.
And maybe it's time to ask that question again.
I mean, what makes us so special? If transpersonal psychology is so wonderful, what has it done for us?
Right. And is it working? And does it have the potential to work, and what does it mean for it to work? And in a way, I feel like people are going up and sort of within their own ideological frameworks, presenting the things that we've heard them present
again and again,
again and again and again. And it might be time to, I miss a kind of critical evaluation, or everyone's very polite, and saying, well, as Brother David said, and well, as...
You mean no one would dare stand up and say, my God, you're not going to sing a song at the end, are you?
Right.
Or not more of your damn heart.
Right.
Well, Nina,
why are you reading?
That's your wonderful
Why are you
function.
reading from a paper? Why? There's 1,700 people standing up and you're reading from a paper.
Have you been to lectures? Because I've been making
Yes,
this
I've been
picture,
to lectures, and people read papers.
Well, yes.
So what brings to my mind is, it's the medium is the message, that if you're going to create a paradigm shift, right, that's about remembering that all of the things that people have been saying, that we're this component and that component, we're spirit and we're nature and we're earth and we're body and we're head and we're mind and we're heart, and then you have to approach the whole thing holistically. You can't do it like this.
So you think gentlemen in tweed suits with small patterns standing before lecterns with their flies open are not leading us into the new world?
Well, I'm questioning it. I can't say for sure, but I'm saying these are the questions that feel like they're moot in the conference, and they're underground. And we used to be the underground, and we used to be the people asking those moot questions and speaking them. And are we still doing that? Are we, or have we become yuppified enough to not be willing to ask those questions?
Maybe it's because I'm obsessed with one subject, but it seems to me...
You are obsessed with one subject, aren't you?
But here's the insight which that gives me,
Yes.
which is... as a movement, this transpersonal thing is vitiated by a huge number of people wanting to cash in on the imagined phenomenon of addiction.
Yes.
So we've got 12-step up the kazoo. And I think, the transpersonal psychology should not be in the business of selling people on the idea of addiction, because it is the end of moral responsibility. If you're an addict, then it's just like getting the flu or PMS or something. It's just not your fault, and you just really better get some psychotherapy and take care of that. So I think I'm surprised that in all these psychedelic panels and so forth, there hasn't been a real attempt to say, look, we need pharmacological intervention. We're hardwired for bashing out the brains of woolly mammoths.
That's what would put it, I don't know that I entirely agree with you, but that's what would give it a dynamic edge that I don't feel like the conference has yet.
People are too nice.
They're too nice, and they're too timid. And you can't be an underground and be timid.
That's right. The avant-garde didn't get there by being polite.
Right. So what happens when transpersonalism becomes somewhat mainstream, not that it is entirely, becomes problematic. Just as what happened in the 60s, it gets kind of bought off, and then people are selling their books and their careers are established, and they're afraid to make those kinds of challenges. I think it'd be great to have a psychedelic panel, or mixed with a 12-step panel.
Were you in the psychedelic panel?
No.
Because it was incredibly polite. I even found myself being polite and thinking things that I thought were bullshit and just letting it fly by because I thought, these people have all
what did you think was bullshit?
Somebody says, they were saying, how can we make psychedelics more respectable? And somebody suggested that they publish a journal in which you didn't sign your articles and you didn't give the names of the patients. And I thought to myself, political gutlessness reaches mega proportions. That's not how you do it. You do it by standing up and being counted, not refusing to put your name on your research. That you've already knuckled under at that point.
See, I think that I still have that sort of Socratic model in my mind, I think, that that wisdom comes through some kind of dialectical dialogue, and that if you really go for the disparate points of view, then you can form your own synthesis that somehow embodies the truth in some way. That may not be exactly the same, but I've sort of heard the truth of people's orientation.
So it's like the I Ching says, knowledge that is not, I don't know how it puts it exactly, but basically knowledge that is not created out of interaction with critics is sterile.
Right, because there's no feedback loop.
Right.
Which there is in every living system. There's
Right.
some kind of a
Nothing
feedback
to
loop.
polish
Right.
the edges.
Right, right. And one of the things I've experienced here, I don't know that I want to go on camera saying this, is that the workshop that I felt, or the lecture, whatever, that was the most interesting was somebody I'd never heard of. It wasn't one of the stars of the transpersonal world, whose stuff I enjoyed. But it was this woman, she talked about this intergenerational psychological patternings that go on. And for me, it was very contemporaneous with experiences that I'm having. So to hear somebody articulate them, even though it wasn't new information, it was confirming experiences that I was currently having. And so I found it very moving to me. She didn't read a paper, she just talked. And she's not a big star, and she didn't tell stories that I'd ever heard before. And I thought, well, maybe that's something going on here that I'm not so aware of, that there's sort of some of the lesser known people who have had to hone their skills more because they can't rely on their reputations, and they're not in the clique.
Right.
Maybe they're the ones who are really cultivating some of this more avant-garde sensibility.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Once you're a known quantity in the media, you're almost self-defined out of relevance. This is called the dancing bear phenomenon. I hate it. I'm sure you're aware of it as a performer. You know, it's why Ad Reinhardt had to paint black canvases till the day they planted him, and because, you know, you become defined. So we'll be just talking about something trivial, and then I'll look away from the camera and introduce you, and then we'll go back to it.
Great.
So you've been having a good time in Prague?
Yes, I've been having a wonderful time in Prague.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing place.
Yes, it's
I'm talking with Mo Maxfield, who is interested in the integration of Aboriginal medical techniques into the traditional system of Western medicine. And you're also well known as an I Ching drummer, is that right?
In a shamanic journey, we do shamanic journeys for people, for groups.
So that's the connecting point between the drumming and the traditional Aboriginal medical system.
Working with terminally ill to find their own imaging, their own healing images, and that's one of the facets of it.
Describe how this would look to the outsider. I mean, do you drum with dying people, for dying people?
There's a foundation in Argentina, and many of the people there are terminally ill. They can't go any further in the medical system there. And so it's sort of a holistic place that was developed down there. And when I go there with my drummers, I first requested to work with no more than 50 people, but 120 showed up, so 120 is what I did. And I took 6 drummers with big Indian skin drums, and they will lie down in the traditional journey posture, and they're very naive. There are no drums, and they haven't heard them, so I've got all these naive subjects. And they'll go on a journey in the morning and a journey in the afternoon. And what happens is that their brainwave patterns will change. I did my dissertation on that. And
So you mean using the drum as a sonic driver?
Yes.
You're pushing groups of people into altered states.
Into an altered state of consciousness, depending upon how easily they will induct and how open they are. Of course, you can stop it. You can stay in beta. You can stay here, or you can go.
So is it pretty well established by studies that these brain transitions are taking place under
My study is the only one that I know of.
Oh, you mentioned you did your thesis on this kind of thing. Interesting. Why does this happen? I mean, why is the brain susceptible to this kind of sonic driving?
It's acting as the brain seems to come into a resonance as the sonic goes into the body and the different brainwaves through the ear. It overrides some of even the pain input, and it comes into resonance like a tuning fork if you let go into it, into alpha, high alpha, or into theta, and that's where all the imaging occurs, of course.
Can a person do this with their voice, or is the drum?
It's the drum is one way. Psychedelics are one way. Chanting the bell is one way. The gong.
But for instance, with the drum, it isn't a matter of oxygenating the brain in the way it is with singing. It's a pure case of having it be sonically induced.
Yes.
This is interesting to me. I've spent time in South America with people who take a psychedelic called ayahuasca.
Yes.
And there are no drums to speak of in the Amazon because the humidity, no drum head would remain stretched.
Right.
They only do cutouts into logs.
Yes.
But they can see sound on ayahuasca.
Yes.
And I wonder about the neurophysiology of sound. It seems to be a relatively ignored area in Western medicine.
Yes, I agree.
Talk a little, if you can, about your notion of the potential that sound might have in some future medicine.
I think that it was probably a very integral part of all medicines, and I believe we lost it. I know little about anything but the drum. I mean, clinically or medically, and I'm not that heavy a clinician. And function only with brainwaves because my experience with just drums was so profound. I said something's happening here. And then when I was in a study for the University of California with an alpha training where I was taught to go into alpha theta states, I noticed that I would be able to track this state through brainwaves. You've got to be able to track altered states with brainwaves. You just have to. That's the way that works. So let's prove this. And so every researcher's dream is when you find a hole in the literature, and there it was.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. And I need my studies validated. I need other studies to do it. But what I envision for this is you can take people who normally would be much too fragile or frightened or traditional to use another doorway, whatever that doorway may be, and with normal-looking people playing some exquisite drums that have good tones, and say this is an ancient technique for, finding your own psychomythology. It's safe, will keep you in 15 to 20 minutes, and you have to do that research. My research proved that too. I've got graphs. That when you do that, and then you come back, and then you're back and it's safe, and you can tell somebody you're not, and you don't have to be frightened.
Why do you, or how do you connect it to the I Ching? What about it is I Ching related?
Well, as I was walking around one day between classes with Angelus, and we were working with the I Ching very deeply, a voice said, I wonder if one would be able to drum the I Ching. And I went, whoa, where did that come from? So I talked to Angie, and we immediately started working on it. And if you drum, you can cast them, and you can drum them, and it turns out it's a focus meditation.
So, for instance, you have 64 hexagrams in the King Wen sequence.
Yes.
And here we have a drum.
Yes.
Now, what do I do?
All right, let's start. If I were going to teach you to drum, I'd start you with a trigram. Let's take fire.
Okay.
We'll start from the bottom, the way it's cast. And it's so simple because it would be fire, fire.
So the long beat is the solid line.
Is the single line, and the double is the two half lines, and you drum all the way up.
I see. So you view the line length as indicative of an interval.
Sure.
Interesting. And then how do you set other values like key and tone?
No,
well, of course, with a drum,
see,
this is not an
key and
issue.
tone. Now,
I see.
Someone took it and did it with an ocarina. It was just great. I don't know other musicians will do this.
So can you sit down and play the King Wen sequence in 384 beats,
Yes.
one beat for each line?
Yes, I have music, yes. See, and also, like, if I take every position of fire that can be, fire above the mountain, fire below the mountain, fire above, then there's a sheet of music for fire.
So it's like almost like Bach's method of composition, theme and variation, recursion, inversion, mirror image, all this stuff.
And there's a wonderful thing that we journey people with. That's all of the yin trigrams put together 4 times for the fourfold way. Against all the yang, they're exactly opposite, so it's called the polarity duet. So you'll have, 3 drums playing one, 3 drums playing another. You can't go as far on it. Keeps you in the channel, and all kinds of relationship issues come up on your journey.
And is it actually musical, or is it just quirky and peculiar?
It's fabulously musical.
Is it?
And you will be able to hear the different resonances of the different patterns. They're very, very different. If I play all the yang, it's very different from the receptive and the yin. It's very different. You can feel it.
It seems that this, this is probably sacrilege from your point of view, but it seems like this set of ideas would lend themselves very naturally to computer composition of music.
Absolutely. Oh, I see nothing sacrilegious. It's, look what I'm doing is sacrilegious. An I Ching scholar would probably have a stroke.
Possibly, although they might surprise you. You've got to pick them carefully.
Yes.
Well, that's very exciting. Where do you see it leading, or what would you like to do with that?
We're working with people and groups of people. One thing that happened is that everybody wants to play a musical instrument, and most people have a secret desire to drum. It's been jerked from our culture through the Christian church. They said it's licentious and you can't do that anymore. So people are finding they can drum. They get hands-on. It's a kinesthetic entry into one of the oldest books on the planet, into an ancient, it's a blending of East and West. And you cannot do the drumming if you're not grounded in your body. You cannot do it. And it takes practice, because as you begin to drum the sequence, you stay here and you also go out. And you can feel yourself starting to leave, and yet if you blink, since it's a random pattern, because you're drumming hexagrams, you lose it, you lose your place. So you have to train to stay present and to go, which is exactly what the shamanic practice is all about.
Is this method a mnemonic device as well? In other words, can you tell me then how to construct hexagram 54? Because you just think...
Yes, probably.
So it isn't, you have internalized the structure of all 64 hexagrams.
I haven't yet, but I'm sure that I will.
But this will come as you develop it.
I'm sure. Because the languages that they used to speak, the drum languages in Africa, they had to learn much more than this. But we're just, I'm not accustomed to that yet, so it's pretty new. I've been doing
then
about
there
4
are
or 5
so
years.
many ways that these hexagrams could be arranged.
Yes.
Ones that derive from mathematical forms of order, random throws, the King Wen sequence.
You can sit down and drum. I'm writing music for each individual hexagram that rolls through the nuclear trigram so that you honor each energy that's in there, and you drum it over and over and over again if you can hold it. But you space out and you lose it, and that's how you know how well you're training as a drummer, is how long you can hold one of these patterns without leaving your body.
So have you discussed any of this with Mickey Hart?
He had my dissertation, but I didn't get the research out quick enough for his book. So I don't know whether it finally got to him or not.
Oh, it probably did. He has a lot on his plate,
yes,
but
he
cares more for drumming than anything else on earth.
Yeah, and I'm close to that.
Yeah, he lives up near me.
Yeah,
Well, this is very interesting. How do you see it working back into the whole larger theme of this conference and the global crisis? It sounds like, as I was talking to Angie, we came upon this notion of the archaic revival.
Yes.
That there are many, many impulses in society, from house music to what you're doing, to what Robert Bly's doing, to what that are often appear at cross purposes, but resolve themselves down into impulses toward a recovery of the archaic and the aboriginal.
Yes.
You know, everything from psychoanalysis to National Socialism to psychedelic drugs,
yes,
and so forth. So this would be part of that.
Well, I can tell you a very short story. When I first started teaching, the one group that loved this drumming the most are adolescents, teenagers, and children. They're right away. A 4-year-old, I can teach a 4-year-old faster than the father of the 4-year-old because they're so natural. And she said to me, she was having a fight with a girl across the way, but they were drumming together on the Polarity Duet, and she said, you know, you just can't stay mad at somebody that you're drumming with, can you? And I said, no, you can't.
What do you think of house music as a phenomenon?
Say more about house music.
It's this beyond rock and roll club music that's becoming more and more popular in England and Germany, and it's very percussive.
Yes.
And it's built around 123 beats per minute, which is becoming the new canon, basically. I mean, that's what they are aiming for.
We see where that's going.
So you weren't aware of this?
In the back of my mind, yeah, I can see the rap coming out of tunes. We're coming into rhythm, we're coming into percussion. And then as the storytellers are now going back to the drum, and I'm sitting in the audience and I say, oh, I know what you're doing. Let me just ride that beat and go on out. And then you can induct me with your deeper wisdom. That's what the drums are for.
Right, so it's a return to trance, to storytelling, and to shamanism.
That'd be nice.
Well, thanks for stopping by and talking about it.
I'd love to teach you to drum.
I'd love to have you teach me to drum. We live close enough together. Maybe we can get in touch sometime.
Great. I'd like that. I'll bring you my book.
Okay, well, I'll see that you get this software.
Thank you. I'll see that.
You may have ideas for how to make music. Nearly every time I show it to someone with any background in music, they say, you know, there's a way to turn this into sound.
Let's collaborate.
I'll get it to you.
Okay, Terence.
Okay,
Thank you very
good luck.
much.
Enjoy Europe.
Okay. Fire. 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 Fire.
So, from your interest in Eastern philosophy, you somehow made a bridge to an interest in comedy and performance. How did that?
I think it was the other way around, that my interest in comedy sort of led me into philosophy and looking for the real jesters in the philosophical world, led me to Mahayana Buddhism, led me to the Taoists.
Sufis, possibly?
Sufis, of course, yes. And I think there's a lot of Western artists and philosophers who are crazy wisdom masters. Of course, Nietzsche and the Dadaists,
Hieronymus Bosch.
Hieronymus Bosch, Mark Twain. You know, Mark Twain's dark writings, so-called dark writings, are wonderful sort of deconstruction, humorous deconstruction of Christianity and Western thought.
I remember he wrote a short novel on the subject of the courtly fart.
Yes. He was a classic. But and I think he was sort of the Western Chuang Tzu. Chuang Tzu is very much like Mark Twain. Chuang Tzu said, "He who knows he is a fool is not the biggest fool." And that's sort of the crazy wisdom outlook, is that we really take ourselves very seriously. And maybe there's no reason to take ourselves seriously. We should think about it.
Well, this sounds a little like the classical cartoon, the guy coming to Mr. Natural and saying, "What does it all mean, Mr. Natural?"
Right,
and
right.
he says,
"It don't mean doo-doo."
You got it.
There are some crazy wisdom masters, though, who sort of transcend that view, and they have a more benign feeling about the human condition. But there are those who, coming out of the crazy wisdom school, you might say, although they would all deny they're in a school, who think that life is pretty much meaningless, and it's the joke's on us. I mean, here we are, born into a life we didn't ask for, not told why we were here, what we're supposed to be doing, and given just enough awareness to know that we exist and that we're going to die. And it's like Wavy Gravy says, if you don't have a sense of humor, it's just not funny.
Yes, well, didn't somebody say life is a joke without a punchline and death is a punchline without a joke?
Franz Kafka, once said, the meaning of life is that it stops.
Yes, it's great. Did you see here in Prague that one of the main streets has a banner with Kafka's name across it because they're doing some theater production? And I thought to myself, if that isn't Kafkaesque, what is? So we've been talking about your interest in Mahayana. I know your main interest is comedy and humor. As the author of Crazy Wisdom, can you put those two things together for us?
Yeah, it's sort of like a cosmic perspective and a comic perspective are one and the same if you get the right angle on the human condition, And there are many great fools and jesters who have also been mystics and have really had the overview of overviews and yet make a lot of jokes and make light of it. It's sort of the lighter side of enlightenment, you might say.
So you mean the great madmen of Western history, Hieronymus Bosch, Dali, Ensor,
Mark Twain, Groucho Marx. I mean, you name it. There's a million of them, and they're both Western and Eastern, and they both. All the crazy wisdom masters seem to say that this life is an enigma, and if it's not an enigma, what is it?
So if you can't understand it, at least you can laugh at it.
Yes, trying to laugh through the tears. I mean, that's been the ancient Jewish way through all their oppression. And being a Jew, born and raised in Nebraska, life has always been a little strange for me. I've always felt a little like an alien.
I was going to say an extra environmental for sure.
Yes.
I'm talking with Scoop Nisker, the author of Crazy Wisdom. Well, now your métier tends toward performance, is that right?
Actually, partially performance. Not a lot of people get my jokes. It's mostly transpersonal people that get my jokes. So I do workshops mostly in Crazy Wisdom, sometimes with Paul Krasner, the editor of The Realist. Mm-hmm. We have workshop participants make up their own religions and their own governments and then present some kind of ritual that would give the facets of that government or religion.
So basically it sounds like the premise of Crazy Wisdom is irreverence and breaking down of boundaries surrounding sacred cows and institutions.
Absolutely, and saying that, we really don't know, and we have to look at all of our stories and see them all as only possibilities, and that nobody's got the answer. And also that, we think so much of ourselves, we take ourselves so seriously, and we think we know what's going on, but every century or so, and every new civilization, we find out that the previous one was wrong. And so to recognize, as Chuang Tzu says, that they who know they are fools are not the biggest fools,
So would you be willing to sign on to the idea that the world is not only stranger than we suppose, it's stranger than we can suppose?
Yes. I sign on to that.
Good. Well, listen, can we have a hit of your Hochkunst here? Let me step away and you just do your thing.
That's your bag.
That's my bag.
Well, I'll sing a little song of introduction. I wear crystal, I think kind of mystical. I like brown rice and green tea. I got myself a mantra, tried a little tantra. Meditation sets me free. You can tell by the things I do, I'm a middle-class Jew. It's been great being here in Prague, where they've had this velvet revolution. It's so soft and beautiful to look at. And they have this president that we in America can only dream of. Václav Havel, a philosopher, a poet, a conscious, compassionate man. George Bush was formerly in the oil business. And the president we had before that was a B-grade movie actor. So they had a velvet revolution here. We're still waiting for our revolution in the United States, the polyester revolution. When the Soviet Empire collapsed, I said to myself, aha, one empire down, one to go. And it won't be long. It seems like the United States' decline and fall is well underway. There's really nothing to be ashamed of. Empires all collapse. No empire can live forever. A couple decades ago, the British were proud to say, looking over their vast empire, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And now it's just those few little islands in the North Atlantic. They might say, the sun never rises on the British Empire. So that's, it's the fate of all empires, and ours is on the decline, real steep these days. The biggest national debt in history, the biggest trade deficit in history. The Japanese make better cars and TV sets than we do. The French make better bottled water than we do. God knows the Czechoslovakians make better beer than we do. I think what we should do is see the writing on the wall and go to the United Nations and announce that we are resigning formally as a superpower, and from now on would like to be known as an ordinary nation, and just save everybody the trouble of decline and fall. That would really, it would set an example for all empires to follow. I think it's really a good idea. And there's a candidate for president who could lead us in this decline and fall, make it easy for us. My friend here, nobody. Nobody will lower your taxes, nobody will feed the poor, and nobody can fix the economy because nobody's minding the store. And nobody has all the answers. Nobody can stop the wars. When nobody wins, nobody loses, because nobody is keeping score. And nobody is going to do it for you, and nobody will treat you fair, because nobody knows the trouble you've seen, and nobody cares. And one more thing, nobody is perfect, and nobody will live forever, and nobody's going to save you. Nobody knows what's going on, and nobody is the one and only one. Well, one more thing, nobody loves you. And nobody could be so divine, and nobody can fool all the people all the time. Well, the Transpersonal Conference, that's what we're here in Prague for. And really what it's all about is breaking out of your personal trance. Transpersonal is breaking out of your personal trance and into the cosmic dance. And you do this by breathing hard and fast and hyperventilating, or by taking psilocybin mushrooms and having a vision, or by taking a hero's journey or a shaman's journey, or taking a Course in Miracles, developing your imagination, your mythic imagination, your intuition, getting in touch with your heart chakra, your right hemisphere of your brain, until you can see the implicate order and you can smell the morphic resonance, and you can feel yourself dissolve into the ultimate hologram of the universal ground of being, and learn to love it all as you do yourself. That's transpersonal, and it's breaking out of your personal trance and into the cosmic dance. Because really, you know, we are all one. I'm one anyway. I think you're probably one too. And you know, those people who achieve oneness can then move on to two-ness. Something like that. Anyway, we are all made of the same stuff. As you can see, you know, there's grass here and trees. And if you go inside of that grass and trees, you'll find subatomic particles that are the same as the subatomic particles inside of me. What else is there to say? I mean, we are all one. And, you know, you can have this cosmic perspective. You know, the Big Bang and everything expanding away from everything else, and it all eventually coming back again into this one little particle that it all came out of. And you can have the great perspective of the Buddha, sits there with his little smile watching empires rise and fall, and individuals rise and fall, and even universes rise and fall. Everything born and transforming into something else, and nothing remains as it is. And the Buddha knows this, and yet he's got this little smile on his face, sort of a little smaller than that of Alfred E. Newman's, who once said, "What, me worry?" The Buddha is sort of like that, but a little bit smaller of a smile. But no matter how big a cosmic perspective you got, sometimes you get the blues, because everybody gets the blues, and life is tough. You know, it's just that way. You know, the Hasidic rabbis used to say, if God lived on earth, people would break out all his windows. So I'd like to close maybe here with a little song called The Buddha Blues. Woke up this morning, there was trouble in my mind. I tried some meditation, but no peace could I find. Called up my guru, I asked him what to do. He said, son, you just gotta remember that first noble truth. You were born to suffer. You were born to pay your dues. And that path keeps getting longer when you got the Buddha blues. Well, money will bring you problems, and love will make you cry. Sometimes it seems like life is just a bitch and then you die. Buddha says desire is what keeps you from being free. And I'm craving for this and I'm craving for that, and it just won't let me be. Gonna lead me to suffer, gonna lead me to pay some dues. And that path goes on forever when you got the Buddha blues. Well, Christian people believe you go to heaven or you go to hell. The Jews believe the Messiah's yet to come, gonna judge this life so well. Some people believe it don't mean nothing in the end, but the Buddha done told me I'm gonna come back and do it again and again and again. Be reborn to suffer, be reborn to pay some dues. And that path keeps getting longer when you got the Buddha blues. Well, everybody suffers, everybody's gotta pay. Look at human history, seems it's always been that way. Black folks sing about it, the red man knows it's true, and the yellow man was the first to discover there ain't much you can do. You took form to suffer, you took form to pay some dues. And that path keeps getting longer when you got the Buddha blues. Well, now we're all born into ignorance in a world of greed and hate. But maybe things will get better when we reincarnate. We won't have so many problems. Our next life will be fine. As long as we don't get a body, Lord. As long as we don't get a mind. Won't have to suffer so much. Won't have to pay so many dues. And that path may get a little shorter. Won't have so many Buddha blues.
Good, good, good.
Did it work?
It worked. They're very happy in production.
They say your atoms will keep moving even after you're dead. They say your mind keeps moving too after it falls out of your head. The scientists will tell you that nothing dies. You can't stop dancing even if you try. Can't stop doing that subatomic shuffle. Oh. It's a subatomic shuffle. That bird's doing the subatomic shuffle.